The disappearance of the Sodder children. Christmas Eve in 1945 should have been a night of joy for the Sodder family. Their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was filled with the scent of pine, the warm glow of holiday lights, and the sounds of children laughing. The Sodders, George and Jenny, along with their 10 children, had spent the evening celebrating, exchanging gifts, and basking in the comfort of family. But as the clock crept past midnight, something was stirring beyond the glow of their home, something unseen, something waiting. It started with a phone call. Just after midnight, the household had begun to settle down. Jenny, still awake, answered the ringing phone. A woman's voice, unfamiliar, distant, asked for someone Jenny didn't know. In the background, she heard laughter, clinking glasses. When Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number, there was an odd silence before the line went dead. A chill ran down her spine. She stood in the quiet of the darkened house, listening. Outside, the wind howled, and then something else. A heavy thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. Then silence. She waited. Nothing more. Dismissing it as her imagination, she returned to bed. The smell of smoke woke her, thick, acrid, curling up the staircase, seeping under doors. The crackling sound of fire followed, alive, growing. She ran, shaking George awake, her voice frantic. Flames were already spreading. The staircase leading to the second floor, where 5 of their children were still asleep, was engulfed. The fire was impossibly fast, unnatural in its hunger. They had no way up. Their children were trapped. George ran outside, his mind racing. The ladder, always kept in the same spot, was gone, vanished. His truck, which had been in perfect working order the day before, refused to start. The phone line was dead. Everything they needed to save their children had been taken from them. Every path was blocked. It was as if someone or something had planned for this. Helpless, George and Jenny stood in horror as the house collapsed into a fiery ruin. By the time the fire department arrived, hours later, there was nothing left but ash. The firefighters sifted through the rubble, searching for the remains of the 5 missing children. They found nothing. No bones, no bodies, nothing. The fire had burned hot, but not nearly hot enough to completely vaporize human remains. Even house fires that rage for hours leave something behind. Fragments of skull, teeth, bone. Here, there was nothing. It was as if the children had never been there at all. Dread turned to suspicion. A neighbor recalled seeing men watching the Sodder home in the days leading up to the fire. Another reported a strange car parked along the highway that night, its occupants staring at the house as if waiting for something. A bus driver later came forward, claiming he had seen 5 children, alive, being driven away from Fayetteville that night. Then, more sightings. A woman working at a roadside diner swore she had seen the Sodder children the morning after the fire. They had been accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, none of whom allowed the children to speak. When the woman attempted to make conversation, one of the men shot her a glare so cold it silenced her instantly. Years later, a hotel clerk in Charleston recalled a similar scene. 5 children matching the Sodders' descriptions, looking nervous, looking trapped. As the years passed, eerie clues kept emerging. A private investigator hired by George and Jenny uncovered strange details. The fire had not been caused by faulty wiring, as initially claimed. The phone lines had been deliberately cut. A nearby resident had even seen a man stealing the Sodders' ladder just before the fire broke out. If the children had been taken, who had taken them? And why? Then came the letter. In 1968, more than 20 years after the fire, Jenny received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man. Dark hair, piercing eyes, familiar. The handwriting on the back sent a shiver through her bones. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Elil boys, a 90132 or 35 inches. It was him. It had to be him. Older, but unmistakable. The Sodders sent a private investigator to track the origin of the letter. He vanished without a trace. The case remains unsolved, a tangled web of secrets buried beneath the ashes of that Christmas Eve fire. Theories range from mafia abduction to child trafficking to something even darker, something that erased 5 children from existence that night. The Sodders never stopped searching. Even after their deaths, the remaining family members continued the fight. But no truth ever emerged. And somewhere out there, 5 children may have lived lives that were never meant to be theirs, stolen in the firelight, lost in the whispers of the unknown. The Vanishing of Lars Mittank. The last recorded image of Lars Mittank is a blur of movement, grainy airport security footage capturing his final moments before vanishing forever. He bolts through the terminal doors of Varna Airport in Bulgaria, his head snapping left, then right, as if scanning for something unseen. His arms pump furiously as he sprints through the parking lot, weaving between cars, his breathing ragged. He doesn't slow down. He doesn't hesitate. He reaches the airport's perimeter fence, a tall, barbed wire barrier, and without breaking stride, throws himself over it, disappearing into the dense wilderness beyond. He is never seen again. To understand the terror in Lars' final moments, you have to go back a week earlier, to the beginning of his trip. Lars Mittank, a 28-year-old German tourist, had traveled to Bulgaria with friends, a simple summer vacation. Sun, drinks, laughter, the kind of carefree escape young men crave. Everything had been normal until a fight at a bar changed everything. It was a minor dispute over football teams, but fists flew, and Lars was caught in the chaos. A punch to the side of his head left him with a ruptured eardrum. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it meant he couldn't fly home with his friends as planned. His doctor ordered him to stay behind for a few extra days to recover. His friends, trusting that he'd be fine, said their goodbyes. That was the last time anyone saw Lars as the man they had known. The paranoia set in almost immediately. Left alone in a foreign country, something in him shifted. The confident, easygoing man his friends had traveled with was gone. Lars checked into a cheap, run-down hotel near the airport, but he didn't sleep. The security cameras caught him pacing the halls at night, looking over his shoulder, peering through windows. He refused to stay in his room for long, constantly switching locations. Hotel staff later reported that he seemed afraid, like a man being hunted. Then came the phone calls. His mother, Sandra Mittank, answered the first one late at night. Lars' voice was quiet, a whisper, as if he feared someone might hear him. "They're following me," he muttered. His words were rushed, anxious. "I have to get out of here." Sandra tried to calm him down, asking who was after him, but Lars wouldn't say. He just kept repeating that he was in danger, that he needed to leave, that they were getting closer. He told her to cancel his credit cards. Then the call cut out. By morning, he seemed to have made a decision. He packed his belongings and headed to Varna Airport, set on flying home. At first, everything appeared normal. He checked in, then stepped into the airport's medical clinic for a final checkup on his ear. The doctor noted nothing unusual. His injury was healing. He was cleared to fly. But then, something changed. Midway through the exam, Lars' body tensed. His pupils dilated. His eyes darted around the small medical room, as if suddenly aware of something invisible in the air. He mumbled something under his breath. Then, without warning, he stood up and bolted. He didn't stop at the clinic door. He ran through the terminal, past confused travelers, past security officers. He didn't have his passport. He didn't have his luggage. He just ran. His sprint ended at the edge of the airport. The final frame of him ever seen was as he vaulted over a barbed wire fence, disappearing into the thick forest beyond. For weeks, search teams combed the surrounding area. Helicopters scanned the region. Police followed leads, checked hospitals, questioned locals. Nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle, no abandoned belongings. It was as if he had simply stepped out of existence. Theories began to swirl. Some believed he had suffered a psychotic break, perhaps triggered by his antibiotics, a rare side effect known to cause paranoia and hallucinations. Others thought he had fallen victim to organ traffickers, lured into a trap, and eliminated once he realized the danger. More chilling were the whispers that Lars had seen something he was never meant to see, something that had marked him. His mother still waits for answers. Sodder Mittank has never given up, convinced that somewhere her son is still out there. But the forest holds its silence, and the last image of Lars Mittank remains frozen in time. A man sprinting toward the unknown, his eyes filled with a terror no one will ever understand. The Dyatlov Pass incident. The Ural Mountains stood silent under a heavy blanket of snow, their peaks piercing through the vast emptiness of the Siberian wilderness. This was a land few dared to tread in the dead of winter, where the cold gnawed at flesh, and the wind whispered secrets only the mountains understood. It was here in February 1959 that 9 hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute embarked on an expedition that should have tested their endurance, but instead became one of the most chilling and unsolved mysteries of the modern era. 9 experienced hikers entered the Dyatlov Pass. None returned. The journey had begun like any other. Igor Dyatlov, an ambitious and well-prepared leader, had meticulously planned the trip. The group, 7 men and 2 women, all skilled in mountaineering, had set out with confidence, documenting their journey in diaries and photographs. Spirits were high. They skied through the icy terrain, setting up camps along the way, their laughter and songs echoing in the stillness of the mountains. But then, something changed. On February 1st, the group pitched their tent on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a desolate, snow-covered expanse whose name, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, meant Dead Mountain. No one knows why they chose this exposed location rather than the more sheltered areas below. Perhaps they were simply following their planned route, or perhaps some unseen force, drew them there. That night, something terrified them so completely that they slashed their own tent open from the inside and ran into the freezing wilderness with barely any clothing, abandoning their supplies, their protection from the brutal cold. They never returned. It wasn't until weeks later that the search team found their campsite. The tent, still standing, was half buried in snow, but it was empty, its fabric ripped open from within, as if the hikers had fled in an instant, without time to undo the entrance. Their tracks led away from the site, bare footprints in the snow vanishing into the distance. But the way they scattered made no sense. Some prints ran toward the tree line, others veered off at odd angles, as if they were running in different directions, as if something had startled them beyond reason. The first bodies were found at the edge of the nearby forest, lying near the remnants of a small fire. It was clear they had tried to survive in the freezing temperatures, their hands showing signs of desperate attempts to cling to warmth. But they had no shoes, no heavy coats. They had fled into the night unprotected from the elements. Further up the slope, more were found, their final positions suggesting they had attempted to crawl back toward the tent as if something had driven them away, and then prevented their return. It was weeks before the last of the missing hikers were discovered, buried beneath deep snow in a ravine. Their bodies, too, told a story of confusion and fear, as if they had fallen, as if they had lost their way in the darkness. The search team, hardened by the brutal conditions of the Ural Mountains, could not explain what they had seen. There were no signs of an avalanche, no evidence of an attack, no indication of a struggle, just 9 lives inexplicably lost in a place where silence reigns. Speculation ran wild. Soviet authorities officially ruled their deaths as caused by an unknown compelling force. But what force? Some believed infrasound waves, low-frequency vibrations that can induce feelings of unease and panic, could have driven the hikers into a state of confusion. Others suspected secret military experiments, an accidental encounter with something classified and dangerous. Radiation traces found on some of their clothing fueled theories of weapons testing gone wrong. And then there were the whispers, stories passed down by the Manzi people, speaking of an ancient presence in the mountains, something that did not like to be disturbed. The pass, once nameless, now bears the name Dyatlov Pass, a chilling tribute to the young hikers who never made it home. Their case remains one of the most baffling mysteries in history, a story frozen in time, locked in ice, buried in the endless white of the Ural Mountains. No one knows what happened that night, only that something made them run, something unseen, something powerful enough to chase them into the cold, where the wind swallowed their cries and the snow erased their footprints, leaving behind only silence. To this day, no one dares to camp in that spot. Those who pass through speak of an uneasy presence, of whispers on the wind, of a feeling that something is watching. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved, its secrets buried beneath decades of frost. And the mountains, vast and indifferent, keep their silence.
Thanks for watching. Come back soon for more dreaded whispers. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.